Nobody wants to hear about your app idea. You're here to pour drinks, not change the world. The words cut through the elegant murmur of cocktail conversations, slicing the air like expensive crystal shattering on marble floors. Alex's hands trembled slightly, the champagne tray suddenly feeling heavier against his palm. Across the penthouse venue, several investors chuckled, their Rolex watches glinting under chandeliers worth more than his yearly salary. The young waiter's face burned as red as the rare sunset view spanning across floor-to-ceiling windows of the 78th floor. He hadn't expected to be humiliated quite so publicly. The exclusive investor gala occupied the crown jewel of Manhattan's newest skyscraper, a glass and steel monument to wealth and ambition. Billionaires mingled with merely wealthy entrepreneurs, everyone dressed in bespoke suits and designer gowns, discussing deals worth hundreds of millions between sips of vintage champagne. Alex, a 24-year-old computer science graduate working nights to fund his startup dream, had memorized faces from Forbes and TechCrunch, silently rehearsing his elevator pitch for 3 weeks. One casual comment to the wrong investor had just transformed his calculated risk into a public spectacle for the amusement of the elite. "Perhaps," came a calm voice from near the window, "the best ideas come from unexpected places." The room's atmosphere shifted as conversations paused. Though dressed simply in a dark blazer and no tie, the man commanded attention without effort. Several guests straightened their postures instinctively, investors who dominated boardrooms suddenly looking like eager students. Elon Musk set down his sparkling water, his gaze fixed not on the influential crowd, but on the young server still frozen in humiliation. What followed would transform not just one evening, but multiple lives, and become a story told in startup circles for years to come. Alex had spent the last 14 months coding until 4 a.m., surviving on ramen and determination while building his algorithm. By day, he delivered food. By night, he served at exclusive events, all to fund his dream without surrendering equity too early. His app used artificial intelligence to predict environmental disaster impacts and optimize emergency resource allocation, something born from watching his Puerto Rican grandmother lose everything to Hurricane Maria. He'd landed this gig specifically because Manhattan's wealthiest investors would be present. The man who had humiliated him was Clayton Worthington III, a venture capitalist whose family fortune originated in oil. At 58, with a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit and meticulously maintained silver hair, he wore his privilege like expensive cologne. When Alex had carefully approached him during a brief lull, mentioning his disaster prediction algorithm and Princeton computer science background, Worthington had seemed almost personally offended that service staff would dare present ideas. "Know your place," he'd said with practiced disdain, before raising his voice to ensure everyone nearby could hear his dismissal. The surrounding crowd's reaction, amused smirks, uncomfortable glances away, a few sympathetic winces, only confirmed what Alex already suspected. In these circles, the distance between serving champagne and pitching innovation seemed insurmountable, regardless of one's education or the merit of their ideas. The silence following Elon Musk's comment spread across the room like ripples in still water. Clayton Worthington's smug expression faltered slightly as heads turned toward the window, where the Tesla and SpaceX founders stood observing the interaction. Though not the tallest or loudest person in the room, Musk possessed a gravitational pull that shifted the party's atmosphere. Several guests subtly repositioned themselves to better witness what might unfold. Musk set his glass down on a nearby table and moved through the crowd, which parted without hesitation. His relaxed attire, dark blazer over a simple shirt, contrasted with the formal wear surrounding him, yet somehow emphasized his status rather than diminishing it. He didn't command attention through ostentation, but through the simple fact of who he was. a man who had repeatedly transformed science fiction into industry-disrupting reality. "I'd like to hear this idea," Musk said, approaching Alex with the direct, slightly awkward intensity he was known for. He glanced at Worthington before returning his attention to the young server. "Assuming you don't mind sharing it in the current company." Phones emerged from pockets and clutches as discreetly as multi-million-dollar deals were typically discussed in these circles. The room's social hierarchy was experiencing an unexpected reconfiguration, the kind that generated the private stories Silicon Valley insiders exchanged like currency. The elite audience, initially entertained by a server's humiliation, now found themselves witnessing something potentially more valuable, the moment a nobody might become somebody under the right person's attention. Alex's hands still trembled, but now from a complex cocktail of adrenaline, vindication, and terror. The champagne tray suddenly felt like an absurd prop in what had become the most important moment of his professional life. A nearby guest, recognizing the seismic shift occurring, smoothly relieved him of the burden, allowing Alex to face Elon Musk unencumbered. "It's an AI-driven disaster response optimization system," Alex began, his voice steadier than he expected. "It combines climate data, structural information, and population demographics to predict where emergency resources will be most needed during natural disasters." He paused, conscious of dozens of eyes watching this exchange. "My grandmother lost everything in Hurricane Maria because help couldn't reach her region in time." Musk nodded, his expression focused in that characteristic way that suggested his mind was already processing implications and applications beyond the obvious. Clayton Worthington, now looking profoundly uncomfortable, attempted to reassert control of the situation. "Surely we can schedule proper meetings for this sort of thing," Worthington interjected with forced joviality. "This is hardly the venue for technical discussions." Musk turned to the venture capitalist, his expression neutral, yet somehow devastating in its assessment. "Actually," he said with the faintest hint of a smile, "impromptu technical discussions at parties have launched billion-dollar companies before. Some of my best investments started exactly this way." He turned back to Alex. "Continue. I'm particularly interested in your predictive models." The room held its collective breath as power, privilege, and potential collided in unexpected ways. The night was just beginning. "The core innovation is in how we combine data sets that nobody's integrated before," Alex explained, his posture straightening as he found himself in familiar territory. The technical aspects of his work had been his sanctuary during months of rejection and doubt. Traditional disaster response relies on historical patterns, but climate change has made those models increasingly unreliable. Musk nodded, eyes narrowed slightly in concentration. Around them, the party had transformed into something resembling a spontaneous TED Talk, with investors and entrepreneurs forming concentric circles of attention. Those closest leaned forward, straining to catch every word. Those farther back whispered questions to one another, trying to understand the significance of what they were witnessing. "We've built an algorithm that can predict with 83% accuracy which neighborhoods will experience the most severe infrastructure failure during hurricanes, floods, or wildfires," Alex continued. "This means emergency resources can be pre-positioned where they'll be most needed, not just distributed based on population density or property values." "What training data are you using?" Musk asked, cutting to a critical question that demonstrated he was taking this seriously. "That's been the challenge," Alex admitted, not hiding the obstacles he'd faced. "We've combined FEMA response records, NASA climate data, and structural information from building permits across 6 major disaster zones, but we're limited by access." Clayton Worthington, increasingly agitated by his diminishing relevance in a conversation he had attempted to prevent, interjected with barely concealed disdain. "This all sounds very charitable, but venture capital seeks return on investment, not feel-good stories about helping hurricane victims. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Worthington had miscalculated, making explicit the callousness that wealthy circles typically kept coded in more palatable language. Smartphone cameras, initially raised to capture the novelty of Elon Musk's interest in a server, now documented something more damning: the naked contrast between innovation aimed at human welfare and the cold calculations of traditional capital. A woman in a burgundy gown, recognizable as the CEO of a major insurance company, stepped forward. Actually, accurate disaster prediction represents enormous potential value to the insurance industry alone. We spend billions annually on post-disaster claims that better preparation could mitigate. The conversation was evolving beyond a momentary spectacle into something with genuine stakes, both financial and social. Musk maintained his focus on Alex, seemingly oblivious to the social dynamics swirling around them, though those who knew him best might have detected the slightest satisfaction in the corner of his mouth. How are you handling the computational requirements? This kind of prediction would need substantial processing power. I've been running calculations on a cluster of modified gaming computers in my apartment, Alex replied with a hint of embarrassment that quickly transformed into pride. Not ideal, but I've optimized the code to run efficiently on consumer hardware. My roommates hate the electric bill. This practical detail, the image of a young innovator running sophisticated climate models on cobbled-together equipment in a cramped apartment, seemed to resonate with Musk in a way that polished pitches rarely did. He gave a genuine laugh, brief but transformative, humanizing the interaction. I started PayPal on a similar setup, Musk offered, creating a momentary bridge between billionaire and waiter that made several onlookers rethink their initial dismissal of Alex. The party had now completely reorganized itself around this unexpected center of gravity. Senior partners from top-tier venture capital firms edged closer, pretending casual interest while mentally recalculating the potential value of what they were hearing. Two recognizable tech founders who had initially joined in the subtle mockery of Alex now tried to position themselves as early appreciators of his brilliance. Clayton Worthington, sensing his social capital evaporating by the second, attempted a desperate recovery. "Perhaps I was too hasty," he announced with artificial magnanimity. "I'd be happy to schedule a proper meeting to discuss potential investment." "Your moment passed when you decided his job defined his capabilities," interrupted Musk with unexpected directness, not even turning to acknowledge Worthington. "Innovation doesn't check credentials at the door." Phones captured this exchange instantly, and within minutes, clips began circulating through private messaging groups. The hashtag #KnowYourPlace was already trending locally, though with an ironic inversion of its original intent. The wealthy crowd, initially amused by a server's humiliation, now witnessed that server's potential ascension, all catalyzed by one of the world's most influential innovators. Alex, still processing the surreal turn of events, continued explaining his technology with increasing confidence, unaware that his life trajectory had likely just been permanently altered. "The real breakthrough potential," Alex explained, now fully in his element, "is in the hyperlocal prediction capability. We can identify which city blocks will experience power failures first, which evacuation routes will remain viable longest, and which emergency shelters are most likely to maintain structural integrity under different disaster scenarios." A distinguished woman with silver hair and a subtle Japanese accent, the chief scientific officer of a global reinsurance firm, stepped forward. "What's your model's performance on the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami? That's a challenging case study with excellent historical data." The question represented a sophisticated technical challenge, one that would intimidate many seasoned entrepreneurs. The room tensed slightly, some expecting this to be where the fairy tale ended. "We calibrated specifically against Tohoku," Alex answered without hesitation. "It provided critical data on cascading infrastructure failures. Our model retroactively predicted 79% of the actual damage patterns, which exceeds most established systems." The CSO's eyebrows raised slightly, genuine respect registering on her face. She exchanged glances with a colleague who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Something significant had just been validated. Musk, who had been listening intently, turned to survey the room before returning his attention to Alex. "Do you have the model with you?" he asked. "Not a presentation, the actual working code." Alex nodded, reaching into his server uniform pocket to extract a slightly worn smartphone. "I keep a version on my phone for testing new datasets whenever I have downtime between serving drinks or making deliveries." This simple statement, delivered without self-pity or grandiosity, landed powerfully. Many in the room managed investments worth billions while struggling to fully understand the technologies they funded. Meanwhile, this young man was optimizing disaster prediction algorithms during his work breaks. "Show me," Musk said, gesturing to a quiet corner of the penthouse with a better view of the Manhattan skyline, a backdrop that seemed suddenly appropriate for discussing technology that mapped the vulnerability of human infrastructure. As they moved away from the center of the room, the crowd didn't disperse but rather regrouped into intense discussion clusters. Venture partners spoke urgently into phones, tech executives made introductions to their data science leads, and several guests, not so subtly, attempted to position themselves where they might overhear the continuing conversation between Musk and Alex. Clayton Worthington stood abandoned near the bar, his social capital depleted. A tech journalist who had been quietly observing the entire scene approached him with a deceptively casual question. "Care to comment on what we just witnessed?" Her phone, ready to record, suggested this story was already expanding beyond the confines of the penthouse. The evening's power dynamics had been completely rewritten, all because a billionaire had chosen to hear an idea from someone the room had designated as invisible. The corner of the penthouse had transformed into an impromptu situation room. Alex's phone connected to a large display screen, normally used for investment presentations, now showing complex data visualizations of disaster impact predictions. Musk stood with one hand resting on his chin, eyes focused with laser-like intensity on the models Alex manipulated with practiced gestures. Around them gathered an increasingly influential group, CEOs, data scientists, and venture capitalists, who had abandoned cocktail chatter for something potentially more valuable. "Run the simulation for Miami under Category 5 conditions," Musk instructed, his attention unwavering. "Show infrastructure cascade failures." Alex's fingers moved confidently across his phone screen, adjusting parameters. The display illuminated with heat maps showing progressive power grid failures, flooding patterns, and emergency response bottlenecks across Miami neighborhoods. The visualization was hypnotic in its detail, blocks turning from green to yellow to red as simulated floodwaters rose and systems failed. "Now overlay socioeconomic data," requested the Japanese CSO who had joined their growing think tank. Alex nodded, adding a new data layer that revealed a stark pattern. The neighborhoods predicted to wait longest for emergency services corresponded almost perfectly with lower-income areas. The visualization made explicit what many suspected but rarely saw quantified so clearly: disasters discriminated based on wealth. "This isn't just a technical achievement," Musk said, breaking a moment of collective realization. "It's a moral imperative. We're looking at a tool that could fundamentally transform disaster equity." The room absorbed this statement, the gravity of what they were witnessing settling over the gathering. What had begun as a social humiliation had evolved into something approaching a watershed moment, not just for Alex, but potentially for how society managed disasters. From across the room, Clayton Worthington watched the scene unfold with a complex mixture of emotions. His attempt to remind a server of social hierarchy had spectacularly backfired, transforming the evening's power dynamics. Worse, multiple guests were glancing his way, with expressions ranging from amusement to disdain. His social miscalculation was being documented in real time, captured in smartphone photos that would likely accompany whatever industry gossip emerged from the evening. A tech journalist had cornered him, asking pointed questions about his earlier dismissal of Alex. "Would you care to reconsider your statement about knowing one's place in light of what we're seeing?" Worthington's carefully maintained facade of unflappable privilege was cracking under pressure. The narrative was crystallizing before his eyes, old money dismissing innovation, while visionary capital embraced it regardless of source. It was the kind of story Silicon Valley mythology was built upon. "The real limitation isn't the algorithm," Alex explained, zooming out to show a global view of vulnerable regions. "It's access to comprehensive data and computing power. With better resources, we could expand coverage to every high-risk zone globally." Musk's expression had shifted from curiosity to that familiar intensity his employees recognized as the precursor to decisive action. "Resources can be solved," he stated simply. "What's your deployment timeline if constraints were removed?" Before Alex could answer, the conversation was interrupted by Clayton Worthington, who had gathered himself for one final attempt to salvage his position. He approached with an exaggerated show of appreciation, champagne glass in hand. "Fascinating technology, truly revolutionary," Worthington announced loudly enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. "My firm would be interested in leading your seed round. Say $10 million to start? We could have term sheets drawn up by morning." The naked attempt at reputation management hung awkwardly in the air. Several onlookers exchanged glances, aware they were witnessing a desperate bid to reframe the evening's narrative. Alex hesitated, momentarily overwhelmed by the sudden shift from rejection to million-dollar offers. Musk watched this interaction with a calculated stillness before speaking. "Interesting timing on your enthusiasm," he observed, his voice neutral, yet somehow devastating. "What specifically changed your assessment in the past 45 minutes?" The question landed like precision artillery. Worthington's practiced smile faltered as he recognized the trap. Any answer would only confirm his opportunism. "I simply needed time to appreciate the full scope of the innovation," Worthington attempted, his confidence visibly deteriorating under Musk's unwavering gaze. "No," Musk replied with the directness that had defined his career. "You needed social proof from someone you couldn't dismiss." He turned to Alex. "The value of ideas isn't determined by the status of who presents them. True innovation requires recognizing brilliance regardless of packaging." The room absorbed this statement in complete silence. It wasn't just a rebuke of Worthington, but a challenge to the entire system of access and opportunity that governed innovation funding. Coming from someone who had repeatedly disrupted industries, the message carried undeniable weight. Alex stood at the center of this moment, no longer the server who had overstepped, but a visionary whose technology might save lives. The transformation wasn't just personal. It represented the possibility that brilliant ideas might be evaluated on merit rather than pedigree or presentation. Worthington retreated, his social defeat complete. Several phones captured his exit, the final punctuation in a story already racing through private messaging groups across Silicon Valley and Wall Street. "Let's talk about implementation," Musk said, returning the focus to Alex's technology with characteristic abruptness. Your algorithm could integrate with municipal emergency systems, but bureaucracy would slow deployment. What if we built a direct-to-consumer version first? People could receive personalized evacuation guidance based on their specific location vulnerabilities. Alex's eyes widened slightly as he processed the suggestion. That could work. A public-facing app would generate real-world usage data to further refine the models while immediately helping vulnerable communities. Exactly, Musk nodded. Bypass institutional inertia, prove the concept with real impact, then scale into government systems once validated. Revolution from outside the system, not within it. The Japanese CSO, who had been silently evaluating the technology, spoke up. My firm could provide historical disaster claim data from 47 countries, properly anonymized, of course. It would significantly enhance your prediction accuracy. A technology executive from a major cloud computing provider stepped forward. We could provide the computational infrastructure and data storage. This aligns perfectly with our disaster response initiatives. What was unfolding transcended a simple investment opportunity. The gathering had morphed into something resembling a war room, with leaders from various industries spontaneously collaborating around a solution that addressed a genuine human need. Financial calculations remained present. This was still a room of capitalists, but they were now balanced against a clear recognition of social impact. Alex, who had begun the evening serving these people drinks, now stood at the center of their attention as an intellectual peer. His uniform, initially a marker of subordinate status, had become almost ironic, visual evidence of the evening's powerful lesson about preconceptions and potential. I think, Musk said, surveying the impromptu coalition forming around them, we're looking at the beginning of something important. He extended his hand to Alex. Are you ready to scale this beyond your apartment-based server setup? The question wasn't just about technology, but about Alex's life trajectory. 14 months of solitary work, financial struggle, and closed doors were culminating in this moment of recognition and opportunity. Alex took Musk's hand in a firm handshake that seemed to visibly transform him, server to founder, outsider to innovator, invisible to seen. I've been ready since Hurricane Maria, he replied, his voice steady with the quiet confidence of someone who had always believed in the value of their vision, even when no one else would listen. The room erupted in spontaneous applause, not the polite acknowledgement of wealth recognizing wealth, but the genuine recognition of merit that transcended social boundaries. Phones captured the handshake from multiple angles, documenting a moment that would soon become symbolic of innovation's meritocratic ideal. Across the room, a server who had taken over Alex's champagne tray watched with a mixture of awe and dawning possibility. In his pocket rested a half-finished business plan of his own. The evening's lesson wasn't lost on him. Perhaps the distance between serving the elite and joining them wasn't as insurmountable as it appeared. 3 months later, Alex stood at the edge of a Puerto Rican neighborhood that had been devastated by Hurricane Maria, the very disaster that had sparked his journey. He wore a simple black T-shirt with his company's new logo, a shield formed by data visualization lines. Behind him, a team of engineers unloaded equipment from vehicles bearing the same emblem. We're deploying sensors at 20-meter intervals, explained a young woman who had previously worked on autonomous vehicle systems for a major tech company. They'll provide real-time structural and environmental data to enhance our predictive capabilities. Alex nodded, surveying the community where his grandmother had once lived. The houses were being rebuilt, but more importantly, they were being reimagined, constructed with integrated technology that would make them more resilient against future disasters and connected to the early warning system his company was now implementing across vulnerable regions. A notification sounded on his phone. The message was from Elon Musk. First investor meeting exceeded expectations. Additional $50 million secured for expansion to Southeast Asia flood zones, waiting on your green light. Alex smiled, remembering how differently investor meetings felt when you entered through the front door instead of the service entrance. He typed a quick response. Green light given. Deployment team already assembled, sending you data from Puerto Rico beta test tonight. He pocketed his phone and turned his attention back to the community his technology would now help protect, the work that mattered most. The story of that night at the Manhattan penthouse had spread through tech circles with the viral velocity that only combines wealth, power, and poetic justice. Multiple versions circulated, each slightly embellished, but the core narrative remained consistent. A server with a brilliant idea, a billionaire who chose to listen, and a venture capitalist who became an inadvertent cautionary tale about judging innovation by its packaging. Clayton Worthington had taken an extended sabbatical from his firm after several limited partners expressed concerns about his judgment. His image appeared in countless memes, most riffing on his infamous phrase, "Know your place," now repurposed as ironic commentary on disruption and meritocracy. The incident had triggered broader conversations about access and opportunity in venture funding, with several major firms announcing initiatives specifically aimed at evaluating ideas from non-traditional backgrounds. Musk had followed through on his interest, leading a $30 million seed round that valued Alex's company, now officially named Cassandra Systems, at a valuation that transformed him from financial struggler to paper millionaire overnight. More importantly, the funding connected him with resources, talent, and data that accelerated his technology's development by years. The disaster prediction system was already being implemented as a pilot program in 3 hurricane-prone regions, with government agencies expressing interest after initial results demonstrated significant improvement over existing models. Early tests showed potential to reduce disaster casualties by as much as 60% through optimized resource deployment and evacuation planning. What had begun as a humiliating encounter at an elite gathering had catalyzed something with potential to transform how humanity responded to natural disasters, all because someone with influence had chosen to evaluate an idea on its merits rather than its messenger. 6 months after the penthouse encounter, Alex returned to New York for a technology conference where he had been invited as a featured speaker. His presentation on predictive disaster response systems drew a standing-room-only crowd. Audience members included emergency management officials, technology leaders, and, somewhat ironically, several venture capitalists who had previously declined meetings with him. After his talk, he found himself approached by a young woman in catering uniform who carefully balanced a tray of refreshments while extracting a worn notebook from her pocket. "I have this idea about using distributed ledger technology to create systems for fair resource distribution during crises," she began hesitantly. "I know this probably isn't the right time." "Actually," Alex interrupted with a warm smile, taking a drink from her tray to free one of her hands, "this is exactly the right time. Tell me more." As she outlined her concept, which showed genuine technical insight, Alex was struck by the symmetry of the moment. The circle had completed itself. What Musk had done for him, he could now do for others. Later that evening, he messaged Musk a photo of his meeting with the server, along with a brief outline of her surprisingly innovative approach to crisis resource distribution. Musk's response came quickly. "Talent is universally distributed. Opportunity isn't, yet." The next morning, the catering worker received an unexpected email inviting her to present her idea to Cassandra Systems' innovation team. The subject line read simply, "Your place is where your mind takes you." In disaster zones across 3 continents, sensors were being installed, algorithms were running, and communities were becoming more resilient, all because someone had dared to speak up despite being told to know their place. and someone else with power had chosen to listen. Some ideas changed technologies, others changed lives. The best ones changed both.